The entire WNBA world thought Caitlin Clark's greatest statement had already been made. A record-breaking explosion against the Liberty. A performance that sent shockwaves through the league. A night where every defender looked helpless, every arena camera followed her every move, and every fan wondered if the league had just witnessed the arrival of a new superstar era. But what happened next left everyone stunned. Instead of celebrating the unstoppable momentum, questions started flying. Why was Caitlin Clark suddenly being pulled at critical moments? Why did the offense shift away from the player who had just rewritten history? Why did the Indiana Fever look like they were fighting between two different identities? And now, the tension has reached a boiling point. Behind the scenes, pressure is building. Fans are furious. Analysts are debating. Teammates are caught in the middle. And Stephanie White's decisions have created the biggest conversation in women's basketball. Was this just a coaching strategy, or was Caitlin Clark being forced to pay the price for becoming too powerful, too quickly? Because the next chapter of this story could change the future of the Indiana Fever forever. And the shocking truth about what happened after Caitlin Clark went rogue against the Liberty is about to come out. Caitlin Clark's rise to the WNBA was never just a basketball story. From the moment she stepped onto the biggest stages in college basketball, she became a symbol of change, pressure, and impossible expectations. Every game carried the weight of history. Every shot created another headline. Every victory raised the question of how far she could take the sport. When Indiana selected Caitlin Clark with the #1 overall pick, the Fever were not simply adding a talented player. They were adding a global spotlight. The franchise suddenly became one of the most watched teams in women's basketball. Fans filled arenas, television ratings climbed, and every decision surrounding Clark became a national conversation. But behind the excitement was a complicated reality. The Fever already had important pieces in place. Aaliyah Boston was viewed as the foundation of the franchise after becoming a dominant interior presence and a former top draft selection. Kelsey Mitchell had spent years proving she could create offense and score at an elite level. Indiana had talent, but the challenge was figuring out how those talents could exist together. Because Caitlin Clark was different. She did not play like a traditional guard. She controlled the pace, created impossible passing angles, launched shots from distances defenders were not prepared for, and transformed ordinary possessions into highlight moments. Her style demanded a system built around movement, spacing, and freedom. But building around a superstar is never easy. Coaches must decide how much control to give a player and how much structure to maintain. They must balance individual brilliance with team chemistry. And for Indiana, that balance became one of the biggest challenges in the league. When Stephanie White arrived, she brought a different vision. She wanted toughness. She wanted accountability. She wanted a system where every player understood their responsibility. Her coaching philosophy was built around structure and execution. But then came the question that divided fans. Should Indiana adjust everything around Caitlin Clark's unique abilities? Or should Caitlin Clark adjust herself to fit the system? For a while, the Fever appeared to be searching for that answer. There were moments of brilliance where Clark looked unstoppable, creating offense that seemed impossible to defend. There were also moments where the team struggled to find consistency, with different players trying to establish their roles. Then came the night against the Liberty, a performance that changed the entire conversation. Caitlin Clark delivered a historic offensive explosion that reminded everyone why expectations around her were so enormous. She attacked one of the league's toughest opponents with confidence, creating shots, finding teammates, and taking complete control of the game. The basketball world reacted instantly. Fans celebrated. Analysts praised her. Social media exploded. But instead of the story ending with celebration, a new controversy began forming. The following game brought questions about rotations, offensive priorities, and whether Indiana was fully embracing the player who had just delivered one of the greatest performances in franchise history. Suddenly, every coaching decision became a debate. Every substitution became a talking point. Every offensive possession became evidence in a larger argument about the future direction of the Fever. And as the pressure continued building, one question started echoing louder than all the others. Was Stephanie White trying to protect Caitlin Clark for the long season ahead, Or was she forcing a superstar to fit into a system that was never designed for her? The tension inside the Indiana Fever was no longer just about basketball. It was becoming a battle over identity, control, and the future of a franchise that had suddenly become the center of the entire sports world. After Caitlin Clark's explosive performance against the Liberty, expectations reached another level. Fans believed they were watching the beginning of something historic. They expected the Fever to lean into the momentum, to give Clark the freedom to attack, create, and dominate the way only she could. But then the next game created a wave of confusion. Instead of allowing the offense to continue flowing through Caitlin Clark's hands, Indiana appeared to shift back toward a more traditional approach. The ball moved differently. The spacing changed. The rhythm that had made Clark unstoppable seemed harder to find. And then came the moment that sent fans into an uproar. Caitlin Clark was repeatedly removed from the game during crucial stretches, including late-quarter situations when many expected the superstar guard to take control. The decision immediately became one of the biggest discussions in the WNBA. Supporters were asking one question: how can a team limit the player who just proved she can take over against the best competition in the league? To many fans, it felt like the Fever were putting restrictions on a player who had just shown she could carry the offense. They believed Clark needed extended time on the court to develop chemistry, build confidence, and create the unstoppable rhythm that made her special. But inside the coaching world, the situation was more complicated. Stephanie White was not just managing one player. She was managing an entire roster. She had to balance Caitlin Clark's offensive brilliance with Aaliyah Boston's strengths, Kelsey Mitchell's scoring ability, and the defensive responsibilities required to compete against elite teams. However, every decision became magnified because the player involved was Caitlin Clark. A normal substitution became a controversy. A tactical adjustment became a headline. A coaching choice became a national debate. And then came the first shocking twist. Behind the scenes, the biggest issue was not simply minutes. It was philosophy. The question was whether Indiana truly wanted to build an offense around Caitlin Clark's revolutionary style, or whether they believed the team needed to fit into Stephanie White's structured system. That difference changed everything. Because if the Fever wanted Clark to become the engine of the franchise, the offense needed to maximize her strengths. More movement, more pick-and-roll opportunities, more freedom to create. But if the coaching staff believed in a balanced approach, then Clark would have to sacrifice some individual dominance for the sake of the entire team. And that is where the conflict exploded. Fans saw a superstar who looked unstoppable when given freedom. Coaches saw a young player who still needed to grow within a professional system. The disagreement became louder. Social media turned into a battlefield. Analysts began choosing sides. Some defended Stephanie White's discipline and long-term vision. Others accused the Fever of failing to recognize the once-in-a-generation talent they had in front of them. The pressure was reaching a breaking point, because the next decision Stephanie White made would not just affect one game. It would reveal exactly what direction the Indiana Fever wanted to take, and whether Caitlin Clark's future in Indiana would be built around her greatness or limited by it. The situation around the Indiana Fever was no longer a simple coaching debate. It had become a full-blown storm surrounding one of the biggest names in basketball. Every possession, every substitution, and every strategic choice was being analyzed by millions of fans who believed they were witnessing a turning point in Caitlin Clark's career. The pressure on Stephanie White continued to grow, because the biggest question was no longer whether Caitlin Clark could perform at the highest level. She had already answered that. She had already shown she could dominate elite opponents, create impossible plays, and completely change the energy of a game. The real question became whether Indiana was willing to build around that greatness. As the debates intensified, another issue began to surface: chemistry. The Fever had multiple stars, but finding the perfect balance was becoming more complicated. Aaliyah Boston's role became one of the biggest discussions. When Boston operated inside the paint, attacked the basket, and used her physical strength, she looked like the dominant player fans expected. But when the offense became centered around slower actions and different spacing, critics argued that it reduced Caitlin Clark's ability to attack. Suddenly, the partnership between two franchise cornerstones became the center of attention. Were Clark and Boston being placed in the best possible situations? Or was Indiana struggling to decide which superstar identity would define the team? Then came the second major twist. The frustration was no longer only coming from fans outside the organization. The conversation around the team suggested a growing demand for adjustments. People around the league began watching closely, wondering if the Fever would make changes before the pressure became impossible to ignore. Because this was not just about one game. This was about the future of a franchise that had become one of the most important stories in women's basketball. Every mistake carried bigger consequences. Every win created more expectations. Every loss created more questions. And Caitlin Clark was caught in the middle of a situation that was bigger than basketball. Her popularity had transformed the league's spotlight. Her performances brought new attention, new fans, and new expectations. But with that attention came intense criticism and constant judgment. Some believed Stephanie White was protecting the team's long-term development. Others believed the coach was ignoring the most valuable offensive weapon she had ever coached. The divide became impossible to ignore. Then another layer entered the story: the pressure from the outside world. Social media exploded with debates. Former players, analysts, and fans all had opinions. Some demanded more freedom for Clark. Others defended the importance of team structure and discipline. The Indiana Fever were no longer just playing basketball games. They were managing a national conversation. And behind every headline was the same question: could Stephanie White find a way to unlock Caitlin Clark's full potential while keeping the entire team together? Because if she failed, the consequences would not only affect one season. They could change the direction of the Fever, reshape the league's biggest rivalry, and create a controversy that nobody inside Indiana was prepared to handle. The debate surrounding the Indiana Fever had now escaped the basketball court and exploded into something much bigger. What started as a discussion about rotations and offensive strategy had transformed into a national argument about leadership, trust, and the future of one of the most watched players in the world. Caitlin Clark's fans were not staying quiet. Across social media, frustration was growing. Supporters believed they were watching a generational talent being placed in a system that did not fully maximize her abilities. They questioned why a player capable of creating historic offensive moments was not given complete freedom to control the game. Every missed opportunity became another piece of evidence in the eyes of critics. Every time Clark sat on the bench during a crucial stretch, the reaction became louder. But on the other side of the debate, many defended Stephanie White's approach. They argued that championship teams are not built around one player alone. They pointed out that the WNBA requires balance, defense, chemistry, and sacrifice. A coach's responsibility is not only to make one superstar shine, but to build a team capable of winning when the pressure is highest. That disagreement created a divide unlike anything the league had seen before. The Fever were no longer just a basketball team. They had become a symbol of a larger debate happening across women's sports. How much power should a superstar have? When does adapting to a system become limiting a player's greatness? And when does protecting team balance become an excuse for not embracing a once-in-a-generation talent? The emotional pressure reached the players as well. Caitlin Clark had always handled attention with confidence, but the constant spotlight created a new challenge. Every game carried enormous expectations. Every performance was judged against impossible standards. Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell also found themselves caught in the middle. Both players had their own careers, their own strengths, and their own importance to the Fever's success. The conversation was never supposed to become a battle between teammates. But outside noise has a way of creating tension. Fans began choosing sides. Some blamed the coaching staff. Some blamed the system. Some argued that the media attention surrounding Clark was making every normal basketball decision seem like a controversy. Meanwhile, the rest of the WNBA was watching. Rival teams understood that Indiana represented something bigger than just another opponent. The Fever were bringing unprecedented attention to the league, and every decision involving Caitlin Clark had consequences far beyond the standings. Even league executives and media personalities could not ignore the conversation. The spotlight became impossible to escape. And then came the emotional breaking point. The question was no longer simply whether Stephanie White's strategy was working. The question became whether the relationship between a superstar player and her coaching system could survive the pressure. Because when expectations become this high, one decision can change everything. One interview, one reaction, one moment of frustration, and suddenly, the entire basketball world could be forced to confront a shocking reality about the future of Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. The biggest twist was that the battle surrounding Caitlin Clark was never only about minutes, rotations, or one offensive system. It was about the future identity of the Indiana Fever and whether the franchise truly understood the rare opportunity sitting in front of them. Because Caitlin Clark was not just another young star trying to find her place. She was changing the conversation around the entire league. Every arena she entered became louder. Every game attracted more attention. Every decision connected to her became a national story. And with that level of influence came a level of pressure that few players in basketball history had ever experienced. Inside Indiana, the stakes continued rising. Stephanie White had to answer the most important question of all. Could she create a system where Caitlin Clark's brilliance and the team structure could exist together? Because if the answer was yes, the Fever could become one of the most dangerous teams in the WNBA. But if the answer was no, the consequences could be enormous. The final twist was that the pressure was no longer coming only from fans or media. It was coming from expectations. A franchise with a superstar cannot afford to waste opportunities. A player with Caitlin Clark's talent cannot spend years waiting for a system to fully unlock her abilities. Every championship contender eventually reaches a moment where it must decide what it truly believes in. For Indiana, that moment was arriving faster than anyone expected. Would they continue building a balanced system where every star sacrifices? Or would they finally embrace the reality that Caitlin Clark's unique skill set requires a different approach? The answer could define the next era of the Fever. Because the story was no longer about one controversial substitution. It was about trust. Trust between a coach and a superstar. Trust between teammates. Trust that the organization had the vision to build something special. And as the pressure reached its highest point, the basketball world waited for the next move. Would Stephanie White adjust? Would Caitlin Clark continue adapting? Or would this become the moment when one of the most exciting partnerships in sports reached a breaking point? Because the next chapter could reveal whether Indiana was building a championship future or accidentally creating the biggest missed opportunity in modern WNBA history. The story of Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever is far from over. Every game, every decision, and every adjustment could shape the future of one of the most talked about teams in basketball. Now the question is simple. Do you believe Stephanie White's approach is building something bigger? Or is Indiana risking the full potential of its greatest star? The debate is only getting louder, and the next chapter could change everything. Share your thoughts. Was this just a coaching decision, or is this a sign of a much deeper battle inside the Fever? Comment your opinion because the basketball world is watching. And stay tuned, because the next move from Indiana could reveal exactly where this team is headed.